Welcome back to Tactics Talk with Guido. I've got a review of the Chinese Tier 6 TD, the WZ-131G FT. You can see it right here in front of you, fairly low silhouette tank. It looks a lot like a 122-44. Some of its stablemates for a size comparison, the Hellcat, Dicker Max, ARL, IKV, Nashorn, and of course the monstrous 100Y. So you can see it is fairly low silhouette, but roughly the same size as some of the medium to smaller tanks. Now this is an interesting tank. The Tier 5 is kind of goofy, but this one starts to take on some of the characteristics of the later tier Chinese tanks. But unfortunately it doesn't take on all of them, and I'll discuss that as I go. Overall, I wanted to like this tank, but I did very poorly in it, which is going to color my opinion of it just a little bit. I think it can be pretty good, but it is to a large extent very situational. Maybe even more than the usual TDs are as far as casemates go. So let's take a look the way I've got it set up. Everything is maximized as far as the modules go. I've already ground through this. In fact, I'm done with the Tier 10, but I'm carrying a rammer, binocs, and camouflage net. Now I was torn on that as far as the modules go because, as I mentioned earlier, this tank wants to be like its older brothers or its bigger brothers, which tend to be better used as assault TDs, but it's also got pretty decent camo, and so not very much armor as well. But the gun is a bit wonky, so you can see what you're running into there. It doesn't do the assault TD thing very good because it's got virtually no armor, which we'll talk about later. It wants to be close to its work because the gun's a bit wonky, but because it's got no armor and good camo, sometimes it kind of wants to snipe, and you've got the wonky gun to deal with. So it's a bit schizophrenic is what I would say overall about the WZ. I've got 30 AP, 8 APCR, and 2 HE, and I'm carrying a standard repair kit, med kit, and an automatic fire extinguisher on that. Going back to the equipment that I'm carrying, as far as that discussion goes, you could go to a more offensive setup if you wanted to roll it as more of a assault TD with a backup plan of sniping. Obviously in that case the enhanced gun laying drive is in play, as is ventilation to help you out right there, and that would make that a little bit better or comfortable as far as being an assault TD goes. So let's take a look at the tech tree. For the tech tree on this new line on the Chinese, you'll find that, and I mentioned this on the Tier 5 review, that there are 4 crew members occupying the exact same 4 spots all the way up to the Tier 10, so you won't run into any issues with that. I easily brought my 60G FT crew up into the 131G FT, and you can do that all the way to Tier 10. Also, as with the rest of the tanks in this line, since they are basically made up dream tanks, there is only one thing to grind through to get to the final module on nearly every one of these tanks, except for in a couple cases there are 2 guns to grind through. You'll see on the WZ-131G FT there's only 1 gun to get, and it ends up being similar to the Type 59 100mm gun, and then you're on to the T-34 2G FT. So not a whole lot of things going on right there. Let's take a look at the results. As I mentioned, I had a bit of a rough time in this tank. Did pretty well in the tank before with a 60-something win rate. On this one it took me 25 games and a 40% win rate to get to the next tank. I did free XP all of the modules, so I didn't have to grind any modules on this tank, and I was only able to roll with a 40%. Take a look at the numbers over here. 67% hits, that's a huge issue. It's quite a bit lower than my standard hit rate, so that was an issue. The gun did cause me some problems. Going back and forth between a sniper and an assault TD and trying to figure out how to get comfortable with this tank was very difficult. Damage ratio was okay, 2.11. Destruction was low, 1.22. That's not good. Look at the armor use efficiency, very low. The tank has very little armor. We'll talk about that when we get into the comparison on it. Come down here, 984 dished out, 466 received, average only 560 on the experience. So with a 40% win rate, that's really going to hurt my experience there. And I'm only at 0.88 enemy vehicles destroyed a game, so really not a very good effort overall in this tank. And it was, I would say that it was very uncomfortable to use. It wanted to be an assault TD, but it wasn't very good at it. And when you flex to being a sniper, it wasn't very good at that either. So this transition from kind of the low tier sniper TDs into the higher tier Chinese assault TDs, this tank and the next one were a little bit wonky as far as that goes. So let's dive down into the comparison. And I've selected 8 tanks here, which is a good cross-section of the other tier 6 TDs. Much like the tier 5 TDs, it's quite a varied group of tanks. You've got some with turrets, you've got some that are paper, you've got a couple that have good armor in there, you got one with quite a large gun and one with a little pew-pew gun as far as the AT-8 goes. As always, I've configured these to 100% crew, no equipment, and no camo. And everything has the maximum types of modules that it can have. So we take a look at it. I got the 131G FT over here. As far as the rest of its competitors, if you look at it, it really doesn't excel anywhere. It wins in gun traverse speed, which, who cares? It's a casemate, really not a huge issue. But going up to the top, it's got a 250 alpha, which is right there in the middle. You'll note the ARL's got that 300, and of course the AT-8 is down there at the 150. Penetration is good. It's near the top of the class. Not quite Nashorn penetration, but not bad. So the penetration isn't a big deal. It ends up working out well for it. Rate of fire is okay. Right solidly in the middle. Reload time is okay. Again, solidly in the middle. Talked about the traverse. The gun depression is a little bit difficult to use. -5 is not great. It's tied for worst in the class, and this goes along with why it is a bit uncomfortable to use as an assault TD. It can elevate 15, which is helpful. Gun traverse as far as side to side is 12 degrees, and that works out pretty well for that tank. It's a good thing. Aim time is okay, but once it gets up around 2 seconds, that starts to get kind of uncomfortable for a sniper TD or an assault TD as you're coming around corners, things like that. So it's not terrible, but not good either. Dispersion is near the top as far as these tanks go, but if you look at them, they're all within 0.8 or so. The dispersion on all these tanks is about the same thing. And its DPM is, again, solidly in the middle. So as far as weaponry goes, it excels basically at nothing. It's very kind of average. The hull armor, some of the worst, obviously. The Hellcat's got virtually none. The IKV's got virtually none. It does have a good sloped front hull, but that doesn't really stand up to a whole bunch. Maybe some tier 4s along the way it'll bounce. So it does suffer in the armor department. Mobility is okay. Traverse speed is where the only thing that it wins on down here. If you look at the top speed, it's 50, which is near the top, not quite Hellcat speed, so it is quite zippy. It can get to spots quickly. It can move around the battlefield when you're working into the assault TD mode, but that tends to kind of get it in trouble, and that is something I've found pretty quickly. If I tried to be an assault TD too early, the speed of it would allow me to get well out in front, and of course then with a casemate TD you've got issues. That was more a problem with how I played it, vice a problem with the tank, but be careful with it. You're going to want to at times rush out there because of its speed, but you've got to be careful. It gets taken down pretty quickly because it is relatively thin. Getting down to the concealment, that is the one place where it actually shines. It's got best in class on concealment at 23.2 and while moving. So that is a good thing. But again, that goes back to what I was talking about overall on this tank, that it's a bit schizophrenic. So it's in that transition phase where the gun's pretty good, the DPM's pretty decent, it's got some good maneuverability, it wants to kind of be an assault TD, but at the same time, it's got that good camo, and you're going to be tempted to sit back. And then you're going to sit there and try to take sniping shots with a fairly wonky gun. A little bit difficult to hit. So the transition was uncomfortable for me. I didn't do so good. Not a bad tank overall, but there it is, the WZ-131G FT Chinese Tier 6 TD. The next one I enjoyed quite a bit more. I hope you like what you heard / saw. If you did, make sure you subscribe, and we will see you.